Now, though, to what could be a historic day on Capitol Hill. After weeks of deal-making, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy will find out today if his GOP colleagues will finally give him the Speaker's gavel. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake reports.
This morning, House Republicans on the verge of a vote that will either make the GOP's Kevin McCarthy the next Speaker or make history. The Republican leader, nominated for the top job in November, now has to win an outright majority in today's floor vote to earn it. But a small right-wing rebellion could keep him from claiming the gavel.
Do you have the votes for Speaker tomorrow?
A group of more than a dozen conservatives have signaled their opposition to McCarthy. In the narrowly divided House, just 5 Republicans could block his bid.
There's nothing he's done to earn my vote. He's part of the swamp cartel.
If McCarthy falls short today, it would be just the first time in a century that a speaker's vote went more than one ballot. The House can't move on until a speaker is selected, a potentially lengthy process frustrating many in the new Republican majority.
I hope we can come together and we get focused on what we got to do.
McCarthy's opponents demanding rules changes that would make it easier to remove a speaker in the future and hoping to push the Californian to the right. His allies say he's there.
It's time to come together, time for them to take the win because they've done a good job negotiating, and it's time for us to be successful for the country.
Today, Republicans take control of the House for the first time since 2018, planning an ambitious agenda, targeting some Biden administration priorities like expanded tax enforcement, as well as investigations into the ongoing migrant surge at the border and the FBI. None of that can start until someone is elected Speaker.
We've got so much work behind us, and we need to start on the very first day.
NBC's Garrett Haake with that report. Let's bring in senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker. We're going to be diving into a piece he wrote.
Yeah.
But first, the question I have for both of you actually is, given who's voting for Kevin McCarthy and who's opting not to vote, they seem to be aligned on a number of levels, at least on how far right they can go. Why wouldn't they vote him into power so they can continue with their agenda, in some cases, pretty crazy agenda?
Well, I don't know that they're aligned on absolutely everything. There are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who understand Republicans should have had a massive landslide. We should have had a massive red wave flash across our screens on election night. It just didn't have it. And David Drucker, as Newt Gingrich said, my former speaker, I don't quote Newt too much, but as Newt Gingrich said earlier, this is the worst case scenario for Republicans. They're looking crazy in front of the world right after a midterm election where they were rejected by most swing voters for being too radical.
Look, I think, the issue with Republicans, to begin with, Joe, and Joe and Miki, you remember this, is they've had massive majorities in the recent past, and they haven't been able to govern even when they have very large majorities. They've had a hard time coming together on reform legislation, government funding legislation, such that instead of moving the ball forward incrementally to the right in a conservative direction, they've ended up letting things, fall backward to the left from their perspective when they were dealing with a Democratic White House and Democratic Senate. Now they have that scenario all over again, but they don't even have the large majorities that they had when President Obama was in the White House. And so I think this is not surprising for any of us that have covered House Republicans in this era. I think the issue for them is how important it is to get to work on the things they can do and get this speaker vote out of the way the insistence by a minority of the conference to claim Kevin McCarthy as a casualty of the power that they have. But I think that regardless of whether Kevin McCarthy gets the votes on the first ballot, the 10th ballot, or it ends up being somebody else, this is a preview of what is to come no matter who is speaker. There are things they are going to have to do to govern. There are things they don't have to do, but they would like to do. But it's only going to happen with a narrow majority if they can put together 218 votes on anything that is on their to-do list. And so far, they can't even do it on a vote that would allow them to get those more, sought-after things started.
Well, and Jonathan Lemire, it's not as if there aren't 5 mainstream Republicans that would vote against McCarthy if he darted too far in some of the insurrectionist weirdos and freaks direction. I mean, hell, there are quite a few Republican members who won in districts that Joe Biden won in. Are they really going to want to be voting for one bill after another that's put up, or support one investigation after another that's run by an insurrectionist, a weirdo, or a freak, when they get voted to actually get things done?
Yeah, and this is the bind McCarthy finds himself. And if he were to secure the number of votes, it's going to be an unruly caucus with such a slim margin. But now, just hours before the vote, he may have been just dealt another blow here, Joe. The Congressman Scott Perry, head of the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, just put out a statement a second ago about McCarthy. I'll just read a little bit of it here. He says, in his 14 years in Republican leadership, McCarthy has repeatedly failed to demonstrate any desire to meaningfully change the status quo in Washington. He says McCarthy's 11th hour pitch to try to win these votes, to try to become Speaker, was a vague ultimatum lacking in specifics and substance. And Perry, in a lengthy statement going through what the Freedom Caucus wants to see from McCarthy, he says McCarthy has let them down. He closes this way, quote, Kevin McCarthy had an opportunity to be Speaker of the House. He rejected it. So these are perhaps more votes that are not going to go McCarthy's way, making his path to speakership that much more complicated now.
Yeah, I mean, that's such nonsense. It really is. I mean, Kevin McCarthy has debased himself. And
I know. That's why I mean they're aligned.
Done whatever they wanted him to do. They were never going to agree on Kevin McCarthy. They just wanted to see him debase himself so they could humiliate him throughout the process and then humiliate him today. Jen Psaki, this sounds kind of familiar. This is what Donald Trump has done to everybody that ever worked for him. They get on board, they compromise, they keep compromising, and then they look up. They've totally debased themselves, and then he throws them under the bus. Same thing that's just happened to McCarthy.
That's right. Look, I'm going to throw out a wild theory here. It may be that the right wing of the Republican Party likes chaos. They want chaos. I mean, even beyond today and tomorrow, if Kevin McCarthy can pull this off somehow, we'll see. The fact that he agreed to this concession of the snap vote means that at any time, by just a handful of members, they can vote for no confidence and oust him as Speaker, which means they go back to this again. And nothing can happen in the House. This is how it works. They can't move forward with committee business. They can't move forward with votes, their agenda, whatever that may be, until they have a Speaker of the House. So they have already chosen chaos here, Joe, and that may be what they want, or what a small wing of the party wants, I should say.
And we should point out, David Drucker, that Congressman Perry, who just put out that statement for the Freedom Caucus, that's separate from the 5 never Kevins who've said we're not going to vote for him, which would deny McCarthy the speakership anyway. This is now from that other group of 9 that were likely not to support him and now saying exactly that. So that's 14 people that you can put on effectively the never Kevin watch, which raises the question, okay, let's say he doesn't clear the threshold here in the next couple of hours on this vote, doesn't get to 218, and this goes on and on and on. Does it ultimately, through some painful process, end up as his speakership, or is there somebody else who actually could step in here?
You know, I've been talking to my sources all morning, trying to get a read on what they think. What are they hearing? What do they think the outcome's going to be? And everybody keeps telling me they don't know, that it's a real jump ball. And, I think what's important to understand here is we talk so much about either the Never Kevins, as you put it, or the House Freedom Caucus, but there are actually a lot more Republicans that are supportive of McCarthy and are what I like to call conservative pragmatists. They don't really disagree on policy all that much from the House Freedom Caucus, but they disagree on tactics, and they believe that you have to govern. And we don't, I think, talk enough about where they are in this process. They have no interest in being strong-armed by a minority of their conference, and there's no speaker or potential speaker that the insurgents are going to get that they're ever going to be happy with, because the pragmatists won't allow it. And you need somebody in that role who can raise money, who understands policy and legislation, and who's willing to take tough votes to govern. I mean, there's no way around this, guys. Any Republican speaker is eventually, at some point, going to have to vote to fund the government, going to have to vote to raise the debt ceiling. The House Freedom Caucus is never going to be satisfied with any sort of deal on those policies that are going to get through a Democratic Senate and be signed by President Joe Biden. The pragmatists know this. They're willing to make some compromises. They're hoping to be able to use the power of the House majority to move things incrementally to the right, or at least keep them from going incrementally to the left. And they're not pleased with how this is unfolding. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them flex their muscles in all of this.